for better or for worse, the first reaction was pretty broadly, why did you do this?
Yeah.
It's
legit. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of, aren't you the Mutants and Masterminds guy? Why did you do this?
Yeah.
Sort of a thing. And I was like, what? You only eat one thing?
Sometimes we were going to order Thai, okay?
Right. Like, I like pizza, but it doesn't mean that I don't like Chinese.
Steve Kenson may be best known for his work on Mutants and Masterminds, but that is not the only game he's been a part of. I sit down with Steve and we talk about Mutants and Masterminds, as well as his other games Icons, Expanse, and Blue Rose. We walk through his approach and philosophy to creating games. I was especially interested in his ability to shift gears depending on the game or the desired look and feel he's going for. He was a great guest, so sit back, relax, and enjoy my time with Steve.
Third Floor Wars delivers interviews, insights, and discussions about everything hitting the tabletop. Rulebooks, plastic models, dice, and cards in hand. Let the gaming begin. Tabletop games let you escape and unleash grand battles and regale epic tales of adventure with your friends. If you love gaming and learning from players, designers, experts, and creators, you are in the right place. Pull up a chair. Craig and Ray welcome you to the Third Floor and the Tabletop Talk Podcast.
Howdy friends, Craig here. Now when the subject of supers and role-playing games comes up, my next guest is always going to be in that conversation. Steve Kenson created Mutants and Masterminds, Icons, and getting out of the superhero genre, we've got something that's a favorite of mine, the Expanse role-playing game. He has written novels and has developed material for a long list of games. And instead of rattling them off, let's just start talking about them. Steve, how you doing? Welcome to the Third Floor.
I'm doing very well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
So, Steve, one of the things that I always like to find out, especially from creators in tabletop industry, is how did you find tabletop gaming? So, when there was a day you didn't know you could pretend to be other people and throw dice, and then all of a sudden you saw it, and I'd be curious to know when that was.
I remember that I was in middle school. I think I was in the 6th grade, and I was the sort of shy, artistic, imaginative kid. I had discovered comic books shortly before that point, and I came across a copy of the gray box of Gamma World.
Oh, wow.
The first edition of Gamma World.
Oh, yeah.
In the same bookstore, like a Hallmark store, that I bought my comic books in. They had the local spinner rack, and they had a small shelf of role-playing game stuff. It caught my eye, and I spent my hard-earned allowance on it, because it was a big purchase compared to 50-cent comic books at the time. And I was just fascinated by it, especially the random mutation tables and things like that. It was like rolling up superpowers. And so I read through it all, and I convinced a couple of classmates of mine to play it with me. And that was pretty much all she wrote at that point.
That was it, huh?
Yeah. We played every Gamma World adventure, which was, I think, all 3 of them at the time that had, were in print. And when we ran out of those, we started making ones up. And then we discovered that Dungeons and Dragons was a thing. And so we started buying D&D modules, and we had our Gamma World characters travel by dimensional portal to Greyhawk,
nice.
And they were, with their laser guns and their mutant powers, rampaging through, the realms of Greyhawk for quite a while.
Yeah. So were you pretty much the GM in that, or did you guys rotate? Or
I've pretty much been the primarily the GM in most gaming groups that I've been in for most of my gaming career.
Yeah.
My current game group, we've been together for so long that a number of my friends also GM, as far as that goes. But usually I was the GM / ringleader.
And was that something that you were happy with, or do you wish that you got to play more? Because I'm a forever GM too, and I love it.
Mm-hmm. I'm usually pretty good with it.
Yeah. Now I got to ask you, of course, because of where we're headed, is talk to me about your love of comic books. It sounds like that happened right around the same time, and I'd be really curious which comics were the ones that you fell in love with and maybe still love today.
Well, it wasn't too long before that, probably about a year or so before I discovered RPGs. I was my family moved around a lot when I was a kid. My dad worked for the VA, and so I used to think that what kids did during the summer was pack up their house and move.
Right.
In between school
Hit the
years.
reset button.
So I spent one summer in a motel on the outskirts of Las Vegas, where we just moved. We moved to Henderson, which is just outside of Las Vegas, and with my parents, my younger brother, and our dog. So I was, in this motel in Vegas with my family, and I'm sure my parents, just out of the interest of giving me something to do so that I would stop bothering them, would give me a couple of bucks and, send me to the 7-Eleven, that was 2 doors down, to buy some comic books so that I would have something to read. And that's pretty much what I did for that summer was I would, buy and read comic books. Then I discovered that there was such a thing as comic book stores.
Yeah.
Which was a completely new phenomenon to me at the time. And I discovered that there were back issues and, again, that was just, all there was to it. It became a weekly thing of, I'm going to the comic store, I'm going to buy all my new comics, and whatever money I've got left over, I'm going to buy some back issues, and, everybody always asks, is it a DC or a Marvel thing? And I was always equally, one way or the other. The first 2 comics I bought was an Action Comics with Superman and an issue of the Fantastic Four. So, it was pretty much even either way.
Sure. And they were different enough, right? You got different flavors, but based off of whether it's DC or Marvel. And I love hearing the Fantastic Four. That was always my favorite. I've always been a big fan. My hope is that Marvel can actually make us a good movie, because I don't think that's happened yet.
That would be nice to see.
It would be nice to see. I agree. So we're in high school, or middle school, I'm sorry, and you're playing Gamma Worlds. You're playing Gamma Dungeons and Dragons with the group. Now, did your love and play continue on through high school into college, or did you take a break?
Oh no, very much so.
Okay.
I started another gaming group in high school. And I was working, my part-time job in high school was at the local library. And I convinced the library to start a game collection of role-playing game materials.
Phenomenal.
And I started a gaming group there at the library. That was the core of a couple of members of that group are actually still in my gaming group.
Isn't that something? No kidding.
Yeah. Basically in college, I made a few other friends who were gamers, and we ended up sort of joining our 2 gaming groups that existed at the time, because they were both short of members, and many of my college friends who were in my gaming group are still in my gaming group.
That's amazing, man. That's amazing for playing for all of those years. So, when do you think the first itch of messing around with these games? Did you do that when you were playing them already and kind of change this or try this out? I'm curious to know when the tinkering started for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody does. I think every game master is a game designer to one degree or another. Whether it's designing adventures or designing your house rules or deciding how something's going to work. One of the great things about tabletop role-playing games is the unexpected.
Yeah. And,
things always happen in gameplay that you didn't see coming. And so you have to think on your feet. And a lot of times it's just this is what we're going to do in this situation because that works and it sounds like it'll be fun. And other times it's, this needs a more long-term fix, as far as that goes. And sometimes that involves creating a patch or, doing a little game design. So I think that there was a certain amount of that right from the get-go.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you brought Gamma World into Dungeons & Dragons, so
yes.
Which I still think is phenomenal. It completely changes Greyhawk, by the way, if you try that out.
Yeah, it sure did.
Now, so all of us, right, tinker around, right? We make adventures, we tweaks. We don't like how they handle the grappling rules in this game, so let's just do it differently. We do stuff like that. But for you, obviously, it was a little bit different. At some point, you realized that you wanted to do a little bit more than just tinker around with your local group. When do you think you first started going, I want to do more, I want to make more and get involved more?
I started doing some stuff with an amateur press association. This where I'm really going to date myself. And
you told me comic books were 50 cents when you were a kid. Trust me, I'm older than you.
So for folks who don't know, amateur press associations, or APAs, are a thing that folks used to do. I honestly don't know if they still do them anymore. Where the members of the group basically would each produce their own writing, whatever it might be. In this case, it was about a game. You would make a number of photocopies equal to the number of people in the group. You'd mail all your photocopies to a coordinator. They would compile them all into a fanzine and mail them back out to all the members of the group. So that I don't think I knew about
any of this.
So you would have a fanzine that was basically put together by however many contributors you had in the group. And back in the day, there were actually a couple of very famous APAs, like Alarms and Excursions, that a lot of the great names in RPG design belonged to at one point or another. I was involved with one called Scrawls from the Sprawls. That was a Shadowrun fanzine.
Nice.
My group was hugely into Shadowrun at that particular time. And so I was writing articles and short fiction and things like that. And other people were doing art and whatnot. And so we were doing this sort of quarterly fanzine amongst the group of, I think there were probably 20 of us.
Oh, wow. So it was good sized. Yeah.
Pretty good sized. So that was where I first got, some initial experience in terms of writing, meeting a deadline, handing over work to somebody, as far as that goes. It actually eventually indirectly led to my writing for Shadowrun, which was my first professional writing job.
That's amazing. Now, I'd be curious, was there a feedback loop that happened there too? So you're mailing in, all 20 of you are mailing in. How did you guys communicate, guys and gals communicate with each other about, hey, I really like this, I really like that? Was there a letter section or? Almost
everybody did sort of a feedback section in their contribution. Nice. That would be like a cover page or something like that. That would be just like, hey, everybody, last issue was really great. And here are the things that I liked. And, this stuff was really cool. And here's what I'm doing in this issue, sort of a thing. So I did actually get a lot of interesting feedback from people and got to read other people's stuff and provide them with feedback as well.
That's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So guys, the Insider Insight series is my opportunity to sit down with designers, developers, artists, writers, and creators and learn how they approach their work. I try to understand their process, inspiration, and methods for crafting their creations. We're going to take a quick break. When we get back from this break, we're going to talk a little bit about writing for Shadowrun. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Alexander Zdanchuk from Riga, Latvia, and I'm a patron of Third Floor Wars. Those guys open the beauty of Malifaux 3rd Edition to me and continue to provide tons of great content. You can support them too. Follow the links in the show notes below or search for Third Floor Wars at patreon.com.
Right now is the part of many podcasts where someone comes on, interrupts the show, and explains that you should consider paying for the content you're already getting for free. They'll go on and explain that by giving $1 or more a month, you not only support the show, but you allow the show to grow and improve. Here on the Third Floor, we commit to not interrupting your episode of Tabletop Talk with such a plea. We pledge not to run a spot asking you to go to patreon.com and give $1 or more a month. Even if there's a link in this show's description, and there is, we won't ask you to click it and become a patron. We won't spend time yammering about the benefits like early access to episodes, getting those episodes without ad breaks, or even getting a chance to play in one of Craig's RPG sessions. Anyway, enjoy this episode. We needed to clarify that we wouldn't do this type of solicitation. Time to give a quick shout out to our most recent patrons. A big thanks goes out to John Mahoney, Philip Maska, Joshua Edwards, Clay Pierce, Peter Sojanek, King Salt Nathan, Jimmy CZ, Wayne Peacock, Oliver Borden, Zachary Wills, J. Douglas Nielsen, Patrick Healy, Hamdog, Greg Packman, Eric Conrad, Alan Cardinal, Raven Zato, and Philip Savoy. Because of you and the 100 other plus patrons, I'm able to put out content on a regular basis. We appreciate you. So you've got this really neat magazine going where you're contributing, you're getting a deadline, you're getting an idea of structure in that way, and then the feedback part I thought was really neat as part of that writing. And then you said this leads to writing for Shadowrun. So how did that appear?
So I was also involved in the online fan community for Shadowrun at the time with my dial-up modem and the whole 9 yards of the dark ages of the internet. And at that time, FASA was playtesting the second edition of Shadowrun. So this is in the very early 90s. Mm-hmm. So I signed our group up as playtesters for the second edition. And I wrote up all the since I was game mastering, I wrote up all the playtest notes and submitted them. I was a very enthusiastic playtester. I can only imagine what reading my playtest notes must have been like. And so there was a lot of, or you could do this, or you could do this, sorts of things. And Tom Dowd, who was the developer for Shadowrun at the time, he liked some of my suggestions, and he said, this stuff is really, this is cool. We could, definitely talk about, using some of this.
You must have lost your mind.
Yeah, I was super excited, about that prospect. But even more so, it ended up that Tom was like, well, for the first source book, we had an author drop out at the last minute. I need like 1,000 words, on, hermetic magic for the magic source book. Would you be interested in writing it? And I was like, yes, absolutely. Like, it was the I've never agonized over writing 1,000 words more in my entire career since.
Well, how did you even know where to start? Like, I'd be stunned if I put myself back at that age, Steve, and somebody like that comes up to me and I wouldn't even know where to begin. Like, where did you even start?
Oh, that wasn't the hard part at all. I mean, it was honestly getting it. It was getting it down to just 1,000 words.
No kidding.
And trying to make sure that I felt it was up to the, it was good enough, that it was polished enough.
Sure.
I was super excited about the subject matter. I could have written about it all day long.
Sure. And what was the feedback? So you send that first draft in, and what was the feedback?
It was basically, yeah, this is good.
Great.
Would you be interested in writing something else sometime? And, basically I was like, yes, absolutely. And so Tom hired me to write a Shadowrun adventure after that. And
do you remember the name of it?
Yes, it was an adventure for the Harlequin's Back adventure anthology. So it was a short adventure about the characters on this metaplanar quest where they go to this weird masquerade ball, essentially. And it was a lot of fun to write, actually.
That's so cool. Now, before that opportunity presents itself, you're doing the thing. Had you already, or you're like me, you had no idea what you wanted to do. Did you already have a sense of what you wanted to do for a living, and then this appeared, or like where were you headed as a human at this point?
I ended up, I went to college for communications, and about the time that this stuff with Shadowrun is happening, I've since graduated from college.
Oh, okay.
And I had initially thought I was going to go into journalism, but doing some internship work with the local newspapers cured me of that desire. And it might have just been writing articles about New England town meetings and, things like that.
As opposed to interstellar travel.
Yeah. It turned out that it was a little dry for my tastes. And so I ended up working for a small tech startup out of college as basically as sort of their marketing, / words person. I was basically their resident liberal arts major because they were all tech geeks and couldn't speak to other humans, essentially, and which was fine. It was a decent job, but I didn't love it. Mm-hmm. So for quite a while, a few years, it was basically working my day job and freelancing in my spare time and writing game stuff.
So when did it start to pile up? When did you start having to make some choices about the quote unquote day job?
Well, that happened when I finally got my first novel contract. After having written, I wrote increasingly larger game projects for FASA. After doing an adventure, I wrote a source book, essentially. And then, other adventures and other, content. I actually interviewed when Tom left FASA, I actually interviewed for the Shadowrun developer job, but I didn't get it. And which was probably for the best, all things considered. But I did continue to freelance for FASA, and after a couple of years, basically, I got a shot at writing a novel for the Shadowrun line. And at that point, I basically did the thing they tell you not to do, and I quit my day job.
And then you started writing a novel at that point. Now, that was not your first time writing fiction, but this would have be considered your first professional fiction work?
Yeah. I mean, apart from short fiction that appeared in game product,
right? It
was.
Did they approach you or did you pitch them? How did that come together as far as getting the novel?
It was basically, they approached me for a pitch.
Got it.
Essentially said, we've got this many novels we want to do, over the next year. Do you want to submit a pitch for one? And I said, sure, I will do that.
And when's the last time you went back and looked at that book?
Gosh, it's been ages, honestly. It's been years.
Did it age well for you though? Do you look back on it and say, it could have been better. I was just a kid, but
I suspect I probably would think so.
Yeah.
I overall, I have a feeling overall, having done a few novels, that I am a better game writer than I am a novelist.
Interesting. Why do you think that is? What's different about it for you? Or why do you excel in one versus the other in your mind?
I think that I am better at games are about creating an environment for other people to tell stories, and fiction is about telling a story. And in some ways, I enjoy the process of creating that environment more than picking out a specific story and telling it. So for me, oftentimes that's the hook.
So we write the novel. You've quit your job. Now the pressure's on. Now, if we're going to make a living at this, we're going to have to make a living at this, because we're not making a living at anything else. What's phase 2 then, after you've quit the job and write the novel?
Well, that became all about really diversifying. I had mostly freelanced for FASA at that point on Shadowrun and on their Earth Dawn line as well. But this became the point where I started, and I had done a couple of other small freelance projects, but this was where I really started to try and get my name out there and hustle for work. Basically it was, I would write for whoever wanted to pay me.
Sure.
So far as that went. And so that was really when I was making more contacts in the industry, really going to conventions to hand out my business card a lot more than I was, just to go and play games.
Sure.
To meet developers and editors and say, hey, I'm available.
Now, at any point during this, had you started thinking about making your own game, or were you pretty much set saying, I'm going to create for other games?
Well, at that time, the notion of creating my own game wasn't really anything more than a sort of a personal hobby project.
Right.
Because publishers created games and, they hired people to write for them.
Right.
As far as that went. And that was just the nature of the publishing business at that time. Now, things are so much different.
They are.
With the options for self-publishing, both electronic and print on demand, and resources like Kickstarter and the like. You can basically create your own game out of nothing as far as that goes. But at that time, unless a company hired you to design a game, you just didn't design a game.
So I'd be curious. We obviously know Freedom City's coming, right? And I'd be curious if that was really your first time saying, like, I'm going to create an entire environment, an entire world, or were there attempts before Freedom City?
Well, I mean, I was a game master, so I had created worlds, as far as that goes. But for publication, not really. And Freedom City essentially was sort of a fluke in some regards. Well, Freedom City was initially a freelance project. It grew out of a freelance project that I was hired to write that fell through. It ended up not being published, and the rights reverted to me because I was never paid.
That's nice.
And so it became one of those sort of pet projects. And basically it became one of those things where initially, because it was contracted work, all contracted work involves a certain amount of compromise. Yep. Usually, at the very least, you get a brief from the employer of I want this, and so once it was mine, I was like, well, screw compromise, I'll just do what I want, and it became sort of my hobby project where I would just continue working on it and adding things to it, and being like, oh, what if I did this sort of thing with it. And although it was focused on the city itself, because it was supposed to be a source book about a superhero city, there was obviously all sorts of bits and pieces of, well, this is the context of the greater universe that it's set in. And so a lot of that stuff continued to accumulate as well over time.
Now, Steve, if I went back and were to steal a bunch of your notebooks from way back then and start looking through, your drafts of Freedom City, your idea books for Freedom City, or even talk to you back then, what were some of the early concepts, the early ideas that in your mind back then made Freedom City unique and its own thing?
Well, I was strongly inspired by Kurt Busiek's Astro City.
I'm so glad you said that, because I always wondered that.
Yeah, very much. There was, and basically it was two things primarily, apart from the notion of the city as sort of a central character itself. Was one, it was basically this notion of just basically a love letter to comics. It was basically just everything you love about comics. Freedom City is everything I love about comics, in one place, basically. Busiek said in one of his introductions about Freedom City, something I thought was really profound, that was basically the idea that a lot of deconstructed comics were about the notion of, superpowered people in the real world, or some variation of that. What if these things really existed, sort of things. And his approach was the exact opposite of, what if we could go into their world, and what would it be like to live there? And I loved that idea and that sort of notion.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's a very subtle difference, though, but it is a real difference. And I don't think I've ever read that from him. But now, of course, as soon as you say it, I'm going back and reading all my Astro Cities again in my head. And I'm like, that's exactly what it was. Those weren't our cities. Those were their cities, and we got to watch them. And that's very fascinating. So in your mind, that's what Freedom City was going to be, is it's going to be a comic book city. It's going to be a place with comic book superheroes in it. And we're going to go there. We're not going to make it ours. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah. Yeah.
Very
basically.
Cool. So when does then it become more than just a pet project? When does it become more than just a side thing that you noodle on and throw stuff at? When's it start becoming more real for you?
I thought about the notion, obviously, because especially when you're a freelancer, you honestly think about how you can monetize everything.
Sure, yeah, you have to.
And so I thought about, ways I could essentially turn Freedom City into a product. But the difficulty I had was that this was in the very late 90s, and there were it was a desert as far as superhero role playing went. There was next to nothing.
Yep.
Wizards of the Coast, or TSR, I should say, still had just gotten their new Marvel Superheroes saga game, Marvel Superheroes Adventure game, out. And that was pretty much it. Hero System was kind of moribund and was actually sort of in legal limbo at that point. And there basically weren't any other superhero RPGs on the market so far as that went.
Well, and the whole industry was struggling a little bit at that time too.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just superheroes.
Absolutely. I mean, TSR had just basically gone bankrupt and been sold off to Wizards of the Coast. And so it didn't seem like there were a whole lot of options as far as that went. That's when I found out that Guardians of Order was going to do a superhero game. Based on the success of their Tri-Stat system from Big Eyes Small Mouth and all of the various supplements and spin-offs for that, they announced that they were going to do Silver Age Sentinels. And of course, I immediately, said I would be happy to write for it, all of that. I did get a writing gig on doing a couple of chapters of the core book, the history of comic books, and some game mastering advice. During the development process, I said, hey, I have this whole superhero setting that I've been working on for a while. Would you guys be interested? And they were like, well, we kind of, already had some thoughts about the setting, that we were going to do as sort of the default setup for the game. So we talked about it a bit, and they ultimately decided they weren't interested.
And was that the moment where you said, screw it, I'm going to do this myself?
No, believe it or not.
It just goes back to being a pet project at that point? It
goes back to being a pet project. And I end up complaining about it to some friends of mine, which is how it actually goes somewhere. I was on a small game industry mailing list with Chris Pramus and Nicole Lindrus and a few other friends. And I basically just complained to them about, I was like, I've got this whole superhero setting and, Guardians of Order won't publish it and I have nothing else I can do with it and all of that. And I had done some freelance for Chris and Nicole's Green Ronin Publishing at that point. This is now the beginning of the D20 license boom. So I had written a couple of D20 source books for them and some other short pieces. And Chris is thinking at this point about diversifying Green Ronin's offerings a bit. And he's like, well, send me a copy. He's like, I'll take a look at it.
And what condition was it in? What did you send him, Steve?
I just sent him it was basically a big Word document.
Gotcha.
At that point. So I sent Chris my draft and he read it and he's like, this is really good. He's like, I'll tell you what, since obviously this is a superhero setting, it needs a superhero game in order to, be a setting of something. He's like, if you want to design a D20 superhero game, I will cut you a 2-book deal. We'll do the game book, we'll do the setting book, and we'll see how it does. We'll put it out there. And I was like, oh, really? D20? Does it have to be?
And he said yes.
Yeah, and he's like, yeah. I mean, he's like, it's the open game license. It's the D20 market. It's like, that's
funny.
That's what's hot. That's what we have to work with.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, guys, let's take a quick break, and I want to hear more about the birth of what many consider one of the best superhero games out there. We'll be right back. There are so many online retailers. It can be hard to find one that is trustworthy, has great prices, along with some reliable customer service. On the third floor, we love ordering our gaming goodies from Gadzooks Gaming. Their selection of terrain, miniatures, dice, custom decor, and conversion bits are curated for gamers by gamers. You'll find they have what you need and what you didn't know you needed to take your gaming fun to the next level. If you mention Third Floor Wars in the cart notes of your order, you'll also get a free gift. And you'll help support the podcast. Check out gadzooksgaming.com and mention Third Floor Wars on checkout to get that free gift. So first of all, I can't imagine the array of emotions, right? So there's one, it's just like, holy cow, Freedom City might become a thing. Holy crap, I got to make a game now for Freedom City. And I've got to make it using D&D, but not using D&D, and I don't want it to be D&D. So As soon as Chris says that to you and you say, yeah, I think I'm going to do this, I literally have no idea what you would do next, Steve. What was next?
So the next thing was I took a copy of the system resource document, which was the open license rules, versions of the D&D rules, basically. And I sat down with it, and I took it all apart, basically.
Interesting.
And it was like, okay, like, let's look at all of this really, like, how does this all work? And I had a pretty good sense of things. My game group had been involved in the play test for 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. So I had seen a lot of the development of the system. I had a lot of sense of the core of it, of how it worked. And so I was like, all right, how are we going to make this work? I pulled a lot of things apart and played around with various ideas. And the core of the D20 system is extremely simple.
Yep.
It's, you roll a die, add a number, compare it against another number, and you succeed or fail. And I'm like, I can totally work with that. It was, the specific implementations of a lot of the more high-level superheroic stuff. And so it pretty much became about two key things as I played with it. It was about figuring out the scale of things and drawing along the idea that a lot of superhero games did, that that scale is sort of logarithmic to a certain degree,
right?
And that having a strength of 10 is not just 9 better than having a strength of 1. It's effectively 100 or 1,000 times better.
The old Marvel superhero.
Marvel did it, DC did it. Lots of superhero games applied that principle. To a certain degree, even D&D did it in a really limited way, in that, carrying capacity increased by doublings,
right?
Over a much shorter range than you would for superheroes.
Yep.
So I was like, okay, I can work with that. And it was it was fixing the problem of damage dice, because I didn't want the game to involve rolling 20d6 damage, and adding it all up at the game table. I had played Shadowrun for a long time. I had rolled all the d6s I needed to in my life. I had played Champions all through college. I had rolled all of the 12d6 damage attacks that I needed to do there.
Yep.
So I was like, and so I looked at saving throws, and I was like, okay, saving throws are the thing that you use for evading all other hazards that aren't damage. So why can't we make them work for damage too? And basically came to the notion of, as long as you can have some kind of gradation in your results, you can do damage saving throws.
So I'd be curious if I were to go back, Steve, and look at some of the early versions of Mutants and Masterminds, and then say, look at the printed first edition of it. First off, what stayed the same? So what was there from the beginning that survived all the iterations to hit the first edition? If we were to look back on it.
Well, the toughness saving throw, the damage save was in there from my initial pitch, basically, for example. And similarly, so was the notion of sort of scaling for abilities and the like. Those were kind of the key points of the initial pitch that I wrote up for Chris. And I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's what, and I want to do basically point-based character creation that isn't, based around classes and things like that, to provide more flexibility. And I want to do, these, kind of, and I want to handle damage in this way, this kind of thing. Chris liked the overall idea of the proposal. It was just really about figuring out the key thing was that we were moving into somewhat uncharted territory where the open game license was concerned, because there were specific requirements for the open game license to carry the D20 logo that indicated compatibility with D&D. Obviously, the big thing was it had to be compatible with D&D.
Yeah.
And this design obviously was not at all. We weren't talking about a design where it was like, bring your D&D characters into this thing and they'd be perfectly compatible. It wasn't going to be that at all. So that was a risk, at that point, because it was a bit of an unknown. No one had really done a product at that time like that. And fortunately, Chris was convinced that I had the right approach. So he was like, okay, we'll forego the logo, and people will figure it out.
Yeah. So when it was released, it was not released as part of that license?
It was released under the open game license, but it was not released under what they call the D20 license.
Got it. I didn't realize those were two different things.
Which is a specific sub-license for that compatibility logo.
Got it. So through the iterations, when I talk to designers and developers, Chris, Steve, I keep hearing the same thing, which is there was one thing that plagued me, and right at the very end, like I figured it out, and then it all came together. Was that true for Mutants and Masterminds? Was there something that you struggled with and iterated, and then right towards the end, right before you knew it was ready to go, you kind of just figured it out?
Honestly, no.
That's cool. That's cool.
It was more, honestly, it was the thing. It was the stuff that I did at the beginning.
Really?
The hard stuff was basically, how am I going to take this system and make it work for superheroes? And once I had the big pieces in place, the rest of it was just detail for the most part.
All the heavy lifting was front loaded.
Yeah.
Interesting. So what did the iterations then look like towards the end, Steve? Was it just tuning a little bit here, tuning a little bit there?
Yeah, it was a lot of fine tuning. It was a lot of tweaking, different things like this needs to cost more or cost less, or needs to be balanced a little bit better, kinds of things. When Eric Mona came on board to edit the book, Eric and I had a conversation of what we referred to as the Legion of Superheroes test. That basically, if the system couldn't create every member of the Legion of Superheroes, we weren't doing an adequate enough job.
Yeah.
So we kind of went through ticked off the list of like, can we do all these characters, with this? So and that was really, what kind of put the finishing touches on it.
So you'd played Marvel's game, you'd played DC's game, you'd played Champions. You had this was not the first superhero game that was created, but it was the first one you had created. And I'd be curious, Steve, having played all of those games, were there things, and this is not a knock on those games, right? But what was something you were trying to fix? So when you went into Mutants and Masterminds, it wasn't going to be the Marvel DC game. It wasn't going to be Champions. What did you set out to do with it that you feel like was successful, that made it what it is and made it yours?
Well, I don't really know that Mutants and Masterminds was meant to address what I saw as a shortcoming in other superhero games. It was, right. I mean, apart from the fact that there wasn't one that wanted to publish my setting.
Yeah.
I mean, truth be told, had, Hero Games, offered me a reasonable amount of money for Freedom City at the time, Mutants and Masterminds would have never existed.
Isn't that crazy?
So I wasn't really trying to address a shortcoming as such. I did design, like all designers, I designed toward my preferences in gameplay as far as that went. So things like the toughness save system was just my preference of not rolling and adding up big handfuls of dice.
Yep.
Because I find that tiresome. So that certainly was an element that just reflects my, personal preference.
So, you won a couple awards with it. You won a couple Ennies with it. What do you think people saw in it? What was the feedback like when it got out in the wild? Was there anything that people said about it, reviews that surprised you, either good or bad?
A lot of people found it a lot of people found it innovative, which was nice. And it certainly did do some things with the D20 system at that time that hadn't really been done. So that was, very flattering.
Yeah.
And people see, and most importantly, people seem to have fun with it. They seem to enjoy how it played. And I think that a lot of people found the way it played reflected the source material, that it felt like a superhero game. So, that was, mission accomplished as far as that went.
Well, and let's be honest, Steve, there's not a whole lot of games that have survived almost 2 decades now that
I know,
that
right?
Still actively play. Like, that's got to be a mind blower to you. You can go to Twitch and watch people playing your game.
Yeah, it's crazy, the fact that it's still around.
It is. It really, really is. So there was several supplements created for it by you and in association with you. I'd be curious if there's any you look particularly fondly on, ones that you really love, or if a kid came up and said, "Hey, Steve, I'm going to buy Mutants and Masterminds. What 2 other books should I buy?" What are some of your favorites looking back on it?
Oh gosh, there's so many.
I bet.
But
well, I want your favorite Fantastic Four issue then. That's just as easy, right?
I'm very fond of Lucien Solbon's work on Hero High.
Cool.
Which was such a great source book and just was so full of energy and character, and is just a delight. They're just those game books that are just delightful to read.
Yeah.
And Hero High is one of those books. And it just had this great energy to it that carried over into the art and the like. I think that Hero High is one of the first Mutants and Masterminds books where we actually have art that has word balloons.
Oh, no kidding.
There's not a lot of that in a lot of Mutants and Mastermind stuff, but a lot of the Hero High stuff has word balloons and dialogue. And a lot of it is like really funny and like, so it was just such a great book. And people have always loved it. So, and that's just a fun genre.
Oh yeah, fun genre, and takes the game to a slightly different place, right? Same world, different place. That's cool. That's very, very cool. Any other ones we should give a shout out to?
Well, I have to say it's not really a book per se, but one of my other really fond memories of Mutants and Masterminds is a few years after it had been out, and I was full-time with Green Ronin at that point, working in development. And we were at Gen Con, and I discovered that my coworkers had made up a nickname for the what they referred to as the Johnny Rocket Fan Club, which was their very nice way of describing the young and often obviously queer fans who would come to the booth.
Oh, this is fantastic.
Looking for me.
Yeah.
And so it would be like, oh yeah, a couple of members of the Johnny Rocket Fan Club came by earlier while you were out at lunch. I told them to come back, because I would have queer fans come up and thank me for including a gay character in Freedom City.
That I can't even imagine what that must be.
It was nice, I have to say.
Well, yeah, and it's very easy for us to forget today what a big deal was back then. Right. Yeah. And how it must have touched so many people. I mean, we weren't even seeing that. I don't think we were really even seeing that in the comics yet. I don't think Marvel had explored that at all. I mean, there were some independent comics that had explored it, but shit, that must be cool. That must be really neat to know. Because I've heard this story, not this exact story, but these times where I've heard creators who used to be the kid that, you know, idolize somebody, then suddenly, you know, they find kids coming up to them and are like, holy shit, you're me. I used to do this to other creators. And that's got to be a really neat moment for you.
It is.
That's cool. That's cool. The Johnny Rocket fan club. I love it.
Yep.
I love that it had a title and everything. Guys, we're going to take a quick break. When we get back from this break, honestly, I could talk to Steve for 5 hours, and we're not going to do that to him. So this next segment, I'm going to do a terrible job of trying to condense some really neat games that he's made, because I want to do a whole segment on icons, because it was really what made me want to get Steve on the show. But there's a lot of good games we need to talk to about before icons. So we'll be right back. Howdy folks, Craig here. Now if you love gadgets as much as we do, you're going to love the new Third Floor Wars Gadget Bundle from Schooner Labs. Branded with the logo of your favorite podcast, it comes with 2 measuring multi-tools, a compass stepper for those tight and important movements, along with a compact dashboard to track your turn, strat, and scheme scoring along with your soul stones and pass tokens. It is the perfect bundle for anyone who plays Malifaux or just wants to look cool while doing it. The link is in the show notes. Check them out and help support your favorite gaming podcast. You're kind of known as the superhero guy, but there's other games that you have made that are very, very popular. And I'll be honest with you, Steve, I have not read Blue Rose. I don't own Blue Rose, but I've heard it as part of a lot of discussion. So for readers that are listeners like me who don't know what Blue Rose is, can you explain it?
Okay, so very briefly, Blue Rose is what we refer to as a romantic fantasy role-playing game. And John Sneed, who is the original designer who originated the Blue Rose setting and pitched it to Green Ronin, referred to romantic fantasy as the kind of fantasy fiction that is usually focused around the notion of good characters upholding a good and decent society, protecting something, and it tends to be somewhat in contrast to the sort of adventurers out in the wilderness sort of plot that was largely the focus of D&D. And so, and of course, romantic fantasy also tends to have a preponderance of women as authors and creators, and often has a lot of coming of age stories and a lot of focus on found family and the like.
Right. Now, did Blue Rose find you, or did you find Blue Rose?
Blue Rose found me, actually, when I hired on with Green Ronin. Green Ronin hired me as a developer a couple of years after Mutants and Masterminds was first published, because it was doing well and they needed more staff to manage their expanding game lines. So I was one of my main jobs was going to be managing Mutants and Masterminds as a game line, but the first thing that actually landed on my desk was Blue Rose. Mm-hmm. Chris Pramus basically said, John Sneed pitched this to us. We have a first draft. We need a developer to look at it. Basically, he's like, I don't have time to do it. So you're newly hired. Guess what?
Merry Christmas.
So I ended up doing some supplementary design on it, and used some of the lessons I learned from designing Mutants and Masterminds, because we wanted Blue Rose to be a more accessible game experience in some regards.
How so?
Well, we wanted it to be a little less imposing than D&D was, and to hopefully reach a broader audience as far as that went. And so we ended up changing from the notion of it being a D&D setting, which is kind of how it started out, and instead making it a standalone game.
It's a big decision.
And essentially using some of the lessons from Mutants and Masterminds to produce a simplified D20 system that we ended up calling True 20. That was first put together for Blue Rose. And
you keep talking about lessons you've learned. I'd be curious what some of those were. What were things that you learned in the process of making M&M?
Well, things, for example, like how all of the various elements of the system resource document fit together allowed us to do things like strip down all of the character classes to just their core elements and kind of create a menu of options that you could configure different kinds of characters, but it wasn't like, here, learn all of these character classes,
right?
Sort of a thing. Or importing Mutants and Masterminds damage system into it. So it wasn't like you had to roll other dice for damage, those kinds of things.
So what makes True 20 in your mind then? If someone were to come up to you and say, I know D&D and stuff, what's True 20? What's a good way to explain really the differences? What makes it True 20?
Well, the core thing is that you only need a D20 to play. You don't need the other dice. Everything is handled with the same check mechanic, essentially. And character creation is a more customizable sort of structure, primarily based around what third edition called feats.
Right.
That you have a lot of those options to build out and customize your character.
Looking at Blue Rose, do you mark that as a success? Do you think that was kind of a next step for you as a designer and developer?
Yeah, I think Blue Rose, I was overall very pleased with how Blue Rose came out. We had the good fortune of having Stephanie Pruman-Law, who is the cover artist for Blue Rose.
The art is gorgeous.
Yes, who is a phenomenal artist.
Yeah.
And was freelancing in the game industry in the early days of her career before she became justifiably famous.
Yeah.
So we were blessed to have a gorgeous piece of art by her for the cover. And that really set the tone for, all of the art and graphic design that went with the game and the whole aesthetic to it. And Jeremy Crawford, who is now a lead rules designer at Wizards of the Coast for Dungeons and Dragons, was on board as editor. In fact, I think Blue Rose may have been his first professional game product.
Isn't that something?
So we had a lot of talent that was involved in it, and I think it was a good product. I think that if it any way it lacked, it was from just not having it couldn't be as lavish a product as it deserved at that time.
Yeah. That's cool. So what now, you're at the same time now, are you transitioning back into being more hands-on with the future of Mutants and Masterminds, or how do we transition into modern age and then obviously the Expanse, which comes around the same time? What's the timeline look like?
So I was developer of Mutants and Masterminds for a number of years and oversaw the second edition of the game and a number of various products. And after a while, I got a bit burned out on development. And basically it ended up being a fairly significant discussion between me and Green Renine, because I just wasn't happy, and we ended up talking about it. And I said, look, basically, I got into the industry to write. I love to write. I love to design. What I'm doing for development is mostly managing other people, writing and designing.
Yep.
And I don't want to do that anymore. And so they were like, okay, we will hire another developer, and you can write and design.
That's a good answer.
And that's what we did. John Leithauser came on board to be Mutants and Masterminds developer at that time. And I went back to writing stuff and designing stuff. And I was much happier about it, so far as that goes. And so that was, when we were in the era of doing DC Adventures, and which led to the third edition of Mutants and Masterminds at the same time. I did primary design on that. John did development. And then we had, sometime after that, Chris Pramus's work on the Dragon Age RPG led to the development of what we refer to as the Age system, the adventure game engine. And Green Ronin did a number of other projects based on that. And I did development on a number of those, including the Age edition of Blue Rose and the Expanse.
Mm-hmm. So I'm a huge fanboy of the Expanse, and I can't imagine what it would be like trying to even begin to put together a game for that. Were you familiar with the books when that crossed your table, or was it I got some reading to do?
Actually, when we initially got the license, I had not read the books.
Yeah.
And so I got them all and read them all in like a couple of weeks.
Good for you. Wow. Because they're not small books.
No, they're not. They're not short books.
And they're a bit of a slog towards the end, too.
But yeah, I mean, once I got into them, I could obviously see, the tremendous gaming potential of the setting.
So there's, you take an IP like The Expanse, and you're not writing a book in it, right? You're not writing a script for a movie or a script for the television show. You're creating, as you refer to it, as a place for stories to be told. What are some early decisions that, looking back on it, did you make to say, like, this is what a role-playing game in this universe looks like? Does that make sense? I'm trying to figure out how you situate the game.
Mm-hmm. Well, some of it is, especially when you're working with a licensed property, some of it is saying, okay, what kinds of stories are we telling here or are being told here? And how can we create a supportive environment to tell stories like that? So that is, for example, why the Expanse version of the Age system has the fortune mechanic in it, which is a modification of the health system of the game that also allows characters to spend some of their health for, improving their die rolls, for, like doing a lot of the things that you do with hero points or bennies or whatever you call them in various RPGs.
Yep.
And the notion that characters can suffer from conditions and serious setbacks, even though they still have a lot of fortune left, necessarily depending on how they spend it. Right. To make characters, kind of force players into careful decisions about their resources. Yeah. As far as that goes, because one of the themes that was really emphasized to us was that resources matter and what you do with them matters. And so we needed to make that an important decision for people to make.
Now, did you end up having conversations with the two gentlemen that created and wrote the books?
Yep.
Go ahead.
They both had final approval on anything we did, and so we especially in the initial stages talked back and forth a fair amount about, well, we're thinking about this kind of approach to this or the other thing, and getting feedback, and that's how conversations like resources and those hard decisions are important.
I'd be curious if you got a new insight in that process about that universe that really impacted the game. Was it just the concept of the idea of resources being a central theme in the books, thus in the game, or what were some insights in having conversations with the authors of the back and forth?
That was one of them. It was definitely the notion that big things are happening, and a lot of it is also about, like, what do you do when, big things happen around you?
Yeah.
Sort of a thing, how do you react? What is your role in that? And that's also how we got the churn system in the game, which is the notion of that sort of looming thing, whatever it may be. That there's some sort of big thing looming out there. At some point, things are going to happen, and you don't know exactly when, but they will, and you sort of have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, it's neat, and I mean, and that's actually a term in the books.
Yes,
that I think it was Amos that talks about the churn and where you are in the churn, and it becomes a bigger thing in it. That's really neat that ended up becoming an actual mechanic, which makes it super thematic. Before we move to icons, Steve, is there other things that you look on as far as your contributions, things that you look back and see your fingerprints on that you're particularly proud of?
Gosh. Although it's been quite a few years, I'm still very happy with a lot of the stuff I did for Shadowrun. And we had a particularly fun time with. I had gotten involved in Shadowrun around the time when FASA was really making the setting very active in terms of events happening in it, so there was a lot of interesting stuff that was a lot of fun to do, and I still occasionally hear very nice things about the whole notion of Dunkelzahn the Dragon running for president, and all of the fallout of that campaign and the like. So
that's neat. That's neat. You know what's funny about Shadowrun, because I was not a big Shadowrun person. I've tried it a couple times and it just didn't click with me. But what I've always found very interesting about Shadowrun is nobody ever says, yeah, it's fine. Like either you love Shadowrun or you just didn't play it. Like I've never met anybody who's milkworm on it. Like the people that love Shadowrun love Shadowrun. They really do. It's very, very cool. So guys, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to get back from the break. We're going to talk about Icons, which is the game of all of these that we've talked about that I think I've spent the most time with and I have the most questions about. We'll be right back. Howdy friends, Craig here. Nothing makes Malifaux easier than having the right tools. Here at the third floor, we love all the licensed Malifaux goodies from Custom Meeple. Not only are they helping support this podcast, they sell custom-made weird licensed tokens and terrain. They sell it all. Crew boxes, terrain, markers, tokens, and even a 3x3 full Malifaux board. Custom Meeple sells a complete M3E token set covering every marker and token you need to play. Custom Meeple are the source for the official accessories for Malifaux. Everything is designed by hand and authorized by Weird Games. Check them out at custommeeple.com, that's with one M, or follow the link in the show notes. Up your Malifaux game and be sure to tell them Craig from the third floor sent you. If you use the promo code Third Floor Friend, all one word, THIRD FLOORFRIEND, you'll get a 5% discount and help support the podcast. It's valid on everything except retail products and playmats. So during the break, I had to make a confession to Steve that I was about halfway through reading Icons before I realized it was the Steve from Mutants and Masterminds. I didn't realize it was the same person. And in my defense, Steve, I think that if we'd covered the name on the front, there's a big difference between Mutants and Masterminds and Icons. They are not the same game, even though they're technically superhero games. So my first big question for you is, where does the itch start? So if we go back forensically and say there at some point there was this little seed, right? This little itch in the back of your head that became Icons. What did that itch feel like?
My coworkers at Green Ronin like to joke that I have a problem. That I can stop, designing superhero games anytime I want, And Icons started out with my interest in Stephen O'Sullivan's design for Fudge, which is the ancestor / cousin of Fate, the somewhat more famous iteration of the Fudge system. But I was always really fond of Stefan's design for Fudge. I actually got a chance to meet him because he's a fellow New Hampshireite.
Oh, okay.
And we were together up at a game con up in Plymouth, upstate. So I was playing around with an iteration of that system, and one of the things I liked about it was its focus on using descriptive words to talk about characters' abilities rather than numbers specifically. Yep. The numbers and the math were there, but it focused on the words. And another system that did the similar thing was TSR's Marvel Superheroes system, which I had always been fond of. And so I initially started kind of toying around with the notion of looking at similarities in those systems. And like, what if you extended Fudge's scale and, added more descriptive things to it? And Fudge had a scaling system that I wasn't really super crazy about. And so I started noodling around with a lot of that. Then I was also, I got a thing about random character generation. And that had been my initial experience with gaming, really, especially with superhero gaming, was those random mutation tables from Gamma World. And my first
part of
superhero
Marvel's game.
Yep, Marvel superheroes. My first superhero game was Villains and Vigilantes, and so the notion of rolling up superheroes was an interesting one, and so I started playing around with that, and kind of looking at the two things in a relationship to each other, and it was another one of those just sort of hobby side projects that I played around with for fun, as far as that went, and I was, I had enough professional work that I wasn't really thinking about doing all that much with it beyond that at the time.
So when does it's this amorphous thing that you noodle around with, you go to and make a random table or figure out, maybe if I try this out. At some point though, it starts to gel, right? It starts to form a little bit. What was the initial jump that made you go, wow, maybe this isn't just me goofing off?
Honestly, the fact that it worked.
That helps.
I mean, you hit the point in a design where you're like, you, for all intents and purposes, you create characters, you play test, and it's like, the first running of a prototype, where you like, you pull the switch or, you hit, whatever, and it runs, you're like, okay, maybe this thing works, like there's something here, and so yeah, I realized that it was, functional, like it could do some interesting things as far as that went.
And so you decide you're going to put this out as your own thing.
I didn't initially.
Oh, really? Tell me.
Nope. No, the real impetus actually to finish the design ended up being another one of those sort of professional happenstances. Gareth Skarka of Adamant Entertainment happened to mention, in some online forum that we shared in common, that basically he was looking to hire a designer to design a superhero game. And he listed basically the sort of things he wanted. And I was like, wow, that's my design.
Turns out.
And so I was like, so I wrote him an email. I was like, so Gareth, it's funny you should mention that because I have designed that game. Basically, I was like, you want to take a look at my draft? And he's like, yes, I would like to publish this.
Oh, no kidding.
He's like, how soon can you finish it?
Isn't that something?
And so we talked, terms and all of that. And I finished the design, and Gareth's Adamant Entertainment put out the first edition of Icons, and we had worked out some plans for some supplementary material. But unfortunately, after doing one source book and a number of short adventures, like so many in the industry, Gareth's, Adamant Entertainment was a one-man show, and he ran into difficulties with other projects and the like. Icons kind of fell by the wayside, and I, as it so happened, had a clause in my contract that let me take the rights back. So Gareth and I sat down for a conversation, and I said, look, you've got enough on your plate. I still want to do something with this, sort of thing. We reached a mutually agreeable, situation. And I started self-publishing it. I put together the Kickstarter for the Great Power source book, which I had already been writing at that time, and then did the assembled edition, which is the current core rule book.
Yeah, and that's the one that was my introduction to it, was the assembled edition. So a couple things. One, it's got a very specific look. And a very specific look, and it's specific from the art to the fonts to the layout. And I wonder, what was first? Was it you saying, I want to create a game that looks and feels like this, or I'm going to create this game and this is how it's going to look and feel? How did the two influence each other, or didn't they?
I was very big on the notion that I wanted Icons to have sort of what I refer to as an animated series sort of look to it. I just really liked the style of it. I was super into, the Justice League animated series, I think at the time as well. And it was just, it was kind of a golden age for superhero animation. I really liked the look and feel of it. It was really fun. It was unique because there really wasn't anything quite like it, at the time. And I wanted something a little different. As far as that went. And honestly, I wanted Icons to have a little more kid appeal so far as it went. And honestly, in relation to that, a little more parent appeal. Because one of the things I saw a lot when I was playtesting and demoing Icons, and I saw some with Mutants and Masterminds as well, was a lot of parents who wanted to teach their kids games.
Yeah.
And oftentimes had a hard time finding things that were appropriate as far as that went.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked about reactions, because I've always found this to be a fascinating conversation. you put out something so different from anything you'd put out before, and built on an architecture that was very unique for you, not only for you, but really for anybody. What was the reactions like? What were the first reactions? And was this something where people got it right out of the gate, or you felt like it had to marinate a little bit before people started realizing what you'd put together?
Well, for better or for worse, the first reaction was pretty broadly, why did you do this?
Yeah. That's legit. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of, aren't you the Mutants and Masterminds guy? Why did you do this?
Yeah.
Sort of a thing. And I was like, what? You only eat one thing?
Sometimes we were going to order Thai, okay?
Right. Like, I like pizza, but it doesn't mean that I don't like Chinese.
But I'm fascinated by the got a little bit of a cult following for this game. Like, this game has got some very passionate fans, and I'd be curious if you have a sense of why that is. And it's not that your other games don't, but there's something that looks and feels very unique to me about the fandom around Icons, and I wonder if you have a sense of what that is.
I honestly, I have to say, I wish I knew. As far as that goes, I mean, you're right. Icons is blessed with a really enthusiastic fan community.
Enthusiastic is the best word. Yeah,
and that's wonderful. And I'm always blown away by that. But I think that people just I think they groove on the game and on how it presents characters. So far as that goes, and just enjoy putting together characters with it. As far as that goes,
have you had an opportunity either during a play test or at a con or maybe watching Twitch or something like that? Have you seen somebody do something with your game that you're like, well, I never would have thought of that, and that's pretty cool that I just saw that happen? Have you seen somebody else play your game in a way you didn't anticipate? And it doesn't have to be for Icons; it could be any of your games.
Oh gosh. Well, there is a particular Icons story that I love that is about, and I actually have it secondhand, but a player in one of my Icons demo games told me about how he had played Icons with his son. And how his son had this perfect grasp of the qualities system in Icons, like even better than most of the people I had played with, to the point where he talked about this whole climatic moment where they're fighting this giant monster sort of a thing. And where, this kid who I think was, like 9 years old or something, is suddenly decides that one of his character's qualities is that he is secretly a robot. And literally, he's like, I'm going to be able to do this because I am secretly a robot. And it's like all in on his determination points.
Oh my God.
And, all of that. And I was like, that is perfect. That is exactly, the kind of, game moment that I wanted.
Well, and it has that look and feel of watching an episode of Justice League animated, it's just got that kind of, that's really, really neat. And isn't it funny that in some ways a 9-year-old, I grasp something like that much easier than some old 50-year-old like me would.
Yeah, I think it's because we overthink it.
I could not agree more. My daughter's only 7, and I'm slowly starting to introduce this hobby to her. And I go in okay, honey. And she's like, Dad, I got this. Like, what the hell? Right. This is easy. I'm like, oh shit. Okay. Yeah. We have to learn how to play. They already know how to. It's amazing. So I'd be curious about tomorrow and after that, Steve. So 2 questions. One, is there things you're working on now that you're super excited about that you want to talk about?
Sure. I mean, in as much as I can, I mean,
Obviously,
The running joke in the industry, when you ask somebody what they're working on is, the proper answer is upholding my non-disclosure agreement.
That's right.
But as far as the stuff I'm working on now, this year I started up a Patreon for Icons in order to basically just be able to do some month to month content. I've released, I've lost count, 8 or 9 Icons books altogether. And although I want to do some more short adventures and some other updating of some of the older material, a lot of times it's tricky to do just a sort of steady stream of content. And so the Patreon is great in terms of letting me write short things that I know are going to earn out and be worth my time. And that, can provide some content for the fans and especially get their feedback and input on what they're most interested in. I've been doing votes and polls, to see what people want to see most as far as that goes. So that's been a lot of fun. And I have to say that nothing sharpens the mind like a monthly deadline. Yeah. So, it also ensures that I, keep productive.
Yep.
So far as that goes.
Yeah. I mean, it, by no means is me putting on a podcast anywhere close to what you're doing, but you sit down and you don't feel like doing it, but you do it, right?
Yeah,
and
you do it.
You have to do it.
Expect it.
And I don't know if it's for you, this happens to you or not, but sometimes that's where some of the best shit comes out. Like when you were like, there's some times where I've had ideas where I was like, I don't feel like freaking doing this. And I'm come out of it. I'm like, oh crap, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
But having that structure sometimes can be good. How about some non-Kenson games that you're enjoying right now? Is there anything as far as board games or role-playing games or even computer games, stuff that Steve, not the creator, but Steve, the player, is enjoying?
I gotta say, I am enjoying playing 5th edition D&D a lot.
Look at you.
I really am.
And why is that?
It's just a lot of fun.
That's great.
Over the pandemic year, Green Ronine started up a company D&D game that we play on Roll20. And it has been a blast.
That's awesome.
It's just like, the gaming when I was playing D&D when I was a kid.
That's great. That's great. That is not what I anticipated to hear you say, Stephen. That's wonderful. That's wonderful that you're discovering that with you. And that's got to be kind of a neat work retreat type thing where you work with these people and then you play with these people. And I would imagine there's some sparks that are flying or some ideas that end up coming out of that process. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So Steve, obviously people can go to Patreon and check out what you're doing there. And I'll have a link to that in the notes. They can also go to Green Ronine and they can see and pick up a lot of your work. Is there anywhere else if someone wants more Mr. Kenson, where should they go?
I have a site at stevekenson.com with my, bibliography and a bunch of my articles. And, if you want to see my random musings about things and, my, I had this idea about D&D, kind of thing, as far as that goes. I'm not great at updating my blog. It happens whenever I feel like it, basically. But it is sort of the central place to find, stuff related to my work.
Perfect. Well, for those of you that stuck around to the end, I appreciate you listening. And Stephen, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
Thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Those of you that stayed to the end, thanks for listening. Take care. Hey, did you hear that? You leveled up. You finished another episode of Tabletop Talk from Third Floor Wars. If you want more from the third floor, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Head on over to our YouTube channel. It is packed with painting tutorials, gaming tips, battle reports, and role-playing actual plays. Did you enjoy this episode? why don't you send a link to one of your friends so they can enjoy it too? Last but not least, write us a review on your podcatcher of choice. This helps us find listeners almost as cool as you. So you should have been there, Steve. I was forgot who had recommended me Icons, and I saw the artwork, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool, and read a little bit of the mechanics, so I went and grabbed it. I probably was like 2/3 of the way through the book before I realized it was you, and made the connection. I'm like, son of a bitch, it's the guy that did Mutants and Masterminds. It was pretty funny. All right, I'll bring us back. I wasn't kidding. I literally could do a whole episode on the Expanse with you. All right. How do you want to go through these, Steve? What is the best thing? Is there, one, I've got Blue Rose, Modern Age, and Expanse. Is there any ones that I'm missing that you think we should make part of this conversation, or is that a good grouping here? Or is there any of these that you don't want to talk about?
No, I'm happy to talk about all of them as far as that goes.
Great.
As far as Modern Age goes, my involvement in Modern Age was mostly tangential in that Modern Age and Expanse were developed at the same time.
Got it. Okay, so let me group them together. And
I did do some writing for Modern Age, but I was not lead developer or lead design on it. That was Malcolm Shepard. Awesome,
that helps. Perfect. And I don't know much about Blue Rose, so I'm really excited to talk about.
Oh, great. Yeah, happy to tell you.
Okay, great. So, guys, we're going to take a quick break. When we get from back to... Try that again. Oh, that's funny. Does it have to be D20?
That was totally my reaction.
You just tired of D20 at that point?
Well, it was D&D, you know?
Right.
So I was like, what? I'm going to create third level superhero characters.
That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. I'll bring us back. That was outstanding, Steve. Thank you.
Great.
Right. So I tried to do as much research as I could, Steve, to piece together this time. You know better than I do, so I'm just going to kind of kick it off and we'll see where it goes.
Sure.
Does that sound good to you?
Yep. Perfect.
Okay, great. Hey, are you still here? Look, the podcast is over, and you sat through all of the breaks and bloopers? Well, I mean, if you're here, you might as well run over to patreon.com and become a supporter. Don't forget to rate and review this podcast, too, while you're at it, on whatever platform you're listening to. I do appreciate you sticking around. Take care.